The sun dipped low behind the rolling hills of eastern Tennessee, casting long honeyed shadows across the Monroe estate. From the grand front porch, the house looked like a painting, white columns, pristine windows, magnolias in bloom. But inside, Evelyn Monroe stood stiff-backed in her father's study, her heart thundering against the cage of her chest. Her future was being traded behind closed doors, and she had no voice in the matter. Across from her, Judge Monroe reclined. In his leather chair, swirling brandy in a crystal glass, his eyes avoiding hers. "It's settled," he said, as if his word alone were law. "You'll marry Silas Danton before month's end." Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. She gripped the edge of the chair beside her, trying to steady herself. "Silas is older than you," she finally whispered, "and cruel." "He's wealthy," her father snapped, "and politically connected. This is not about your feelings, it's about security, for our family." "For you? For me?" Evelyn's voice broke. "You're selling me off like land. Enough." The judge slammed his glass down, the liquid sloshing over the rim. "You'll do your duty as a Monroe." She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she knew better. The Monroe name carried weight in this part of Tennessee. Her mother had passed 5 years ago, leaving only Evelyn, the judge, and a household of servants too fearful to speak up. Evelyn had been raised with tutors, not freedom. Her world was parlors and embroidery, not decisions and dreams, but she'd always watched, always listened. She had seen the way Silas Danton treated his workers, like livestock. She had heard the rumors about his first wife's accident and the bruises she wore before her death. She would not be next. That night, while the house slept beneath velvet skies, Evelyn moved through the dark halls like a ghost. Her mother's riding cloak was still stored in a cedar chest, smelling faintly of lavender. She tucked her few coins into a cloth pouch and took nothing more than water, dried apples, and a small knife hidden in her boot. The stables creaked in the wind as she approached. Her father's prized Mare Adeline stood calm as Evelyn saddled her. "Just one night, girl," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just get me past the ridge." By dawn, Evelyn was far beyond the family's land into unfamiliar hills, thick with summer trees and early fog. The road gave way to dirt, then rock, then nothing but forest. She hadn't ridden like this since childhood. Her hands ached, her dress was torn, and every sound twig snap, owl call, rustle made her spine tighten with fear. But it was still better than being owned. By midday, her strength was waning. She let the horse drink at a shallow stream, kneeling. Tia washed her face in the cold water. As she cupped her hands, something shimmered in her mind, a memory of her mother's voice. Reading by lamplight. "A woman is not livestock. She is the fire, not the hearth." Evelyn hadn't understood it then. She did now. She stood, wiped her hands, and prepared to ride farther into the wilderness. Unaware that she was being watched. From the cover of a nearby hill, a man stood in the brush, still as a tree. Tawodi had been hunting game when he saw the girl-torn dress, wild eyes, desperation bleeding from every movement. Not many white women wandered into Cherokee lands alone. Fewer survived. He didn't move. Not yet. She was headed toward dangerous terrain, steep ridges, bear territory, and worse men who took what they wanted from women like her. Tawodi had seen it before, had fought it when he could. Still, he waited, watched, judged her not by her skin but her spirit. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. He saw her pull herself back into the saddle and ride on with cracked lips and determined eyes. She was running from something, but she didn't look lost. Not yet. Still, he turned his steps toward her path, silent as wind, shadow against pine, because something told him she would need more than courage before this journey was over. And maybe, just maybe, he would need something too, the deeper Evelyn rode into the mountains, the more the world transformed. The neat boundaries of the plantation faded into raw, untamed wilderness. Trees loomed ancient and close, their roots curling like fingers through moss-covered soil. The sun filtered in slants through thick branches, dappling her cloak in gold. And shadow. Adeline, the mare, was tiring. Evelyn had ridden hard through the night, afraid to stop. She didn't know if her father had noticed yet, or worse, if Silas had, but she did know that every hour she put between herself and the Monroe name was precious. Still, exhaustion was catching up with her. Her thighs ached from the saddle. Her mouth was dry, and her heart beat in a panicked rhythm, half from fear, half from the unknown. She wasn't trained for this. She hadn't even ridden more than a mile since she was a girl. But desperation had taught her to keep going. Somewhere above her, high in the canopy, a hawk shrieked. She wasn't alone. Evelyn slowed the mare. She scanned the trees, but saw nothing. Still, the hair on the back of her neck lifted. It wasn't just the cry of the hawk, it was the feeling. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not by an animal, but by something. Human. She turned Adeline off the main trail and followed a narrow deer path that wound around a steep ravine. The land was unfamiliar, but she had overheard enough stories from kitchen hands and passing travelers to know these hills held more than bears and bobcats. They were said to hold secrets, old ones, forgotten ones. Stories of men who disappeared into the trees, and of tribes driven off the land but never quite gone. Her father called them ghosts in buckskin. Evelyn knew better than to believe him. Still, when she heard a rustle behind her, she gripped the reins tight. "Who's there?" She called. No answer. "Show yourself," she demanded, though her voice cracked with fear. Still nothing. Only the wind, whispering through pine needles. And yet, someone was there. She could feel it, like a current in the air. Eyes intelligent and quiet, following her every move. Tawodi watched. From a vantage point above the path, hidden behind a veil of young pine trees, he observed the girl carefully. She was strong in a way few settlers' daughters were. Not in muscle, but in spirit. Her eyes scanned every shadow, her body alert. She hadn't broken yet. He didn't know her name, but he knew what she was, a runaway. Maybe from a bad marriage, maybe from something darker. The marks of flight were always the same. Torn clothing, frantic eyes, a horse driven past its limits. Tawodi's. Jaw tensed. He hadn't lived among his people in years, not since he'd refused to side with the federal soldiers who turned on Cherokee families that resisted removal. Still, the old ways remained in his bones. Protect the land. Protect the vulnerable. Show no mercy to those who prey on the weak. His instincts warred with caution. He didn't trust settlers, especially not rich girls running into the woods, without understanding the dangers. But something in this one's face. She looked like a woman trying to survive, not manipulate. So he moved, silently. He stepped into her path. Evelyn gasped, pulling Adeline to a halt so fast the horse reared slightly. A man had emerged from the forest, no sound, no warning. Tall, broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed and marked with years under the sun. He wore buckskin leggings, a knife at his side, and a bow slung across his back. His expression was unreadable, not hostile, but not gentle either. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He didn't answer right away. He studied her, her trembling hands, the sweat beating at her brow, the desperation hidden beneath her pride. "You lost?" he asked at last. His voice was low, quiet, carrying the weight of both caution and care. "No," she said quickly. "I left, on purpose." He raised an eyebrow. "You're far from town." "I know." "Alone?" She hesitated. "Yes." He looked at her horse, the bag tied to the saddle, her worn boots. "You won't last long," he said, Evelyn lifted her chin. I'll manage. He didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes. A flicker. Respect, maybe. Hunters are. Out here, he said, not all of them hunt deer. Evelyn swallowed. Are you one of them? I am, he said. But I don't hunt women. She didn't know whether to be relieved or afraid. Then he added, You can ride with me for a while. If you want to live. She stared at him, torn. Trusting a stranger, especially a man, was the last thing she wanted. But she was cold, tired, and hopelessly lost. He wasn't looking at her like a prize or a burden. He was offering a choice. Evelyn. Made hers. I'll ride. And together, they disappeared into the deeper woods where the real story began. The forest grew darker as the sun slid behind the mountains. Long shadows laced the trail as Evelyn followed the Cherokee hunter deeper into the woods. He hadn't told her his name yet. He moved ahead on foot, silent and sure, as if the forest itself parted just for him. He knew the land, knew the sounds, the smells, the warning signs. Evelyn felt like a trespasser in comparison, like one sharp breath might collapse the whole world around her. He paused by a stream and motioned for her to dismount. Wordlessly, she obeyed. Camp here, he said. She opened her mouth to ask how he could be so certain it was safe. But then she noticed the signs: shelter from wind, thick trees to mask their scent, dry ground. She said nothing. She didn't want to sound like a pampered fool, even if that's how she felt. As he gathered wood, Evelyn tended to Adeline, brushing the horse's flanks and whispering reassurances. The mare had carried her far and faithfully, but she was fading. They both were. When Evelyn finally sat beside the small fire he built, her hands trembled, not from cold, but from everything that had come before, her father's voice echoing, Silas's cold stare, the silent ride into nowhere. Man handed her a strip of dried venison and a warm root mash wrapped in leaves. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she said, quietly. He only nodded. They sat in silence, broken only by the crackle of fire. For the first time in days, Evelyn let herself breathe, not just shallow gulps to keep from crying, but full, chest-deep breaths that reached her soul. This wasn't home. But it wasn't prison either. Do you live out here? She asked after a while, her voice soft, uncertain. Yes. Alone? He nodded. Safer that way. For who? He looked at her then, eyes catching the firelight. For everyone. She didn't press. Something in his voice warned her not to. Instead, she offered a piece of herself in return. I left because they were going to marry me off, she said. To a man named Silas Danton. He isn't kind. The man didn't look surprised. Rich men rarely are. She gave a bitter smile. I wasn't given a choice. I was just the name on a deed. Part of a trade. He stirred the fire with a stick. So you ran. Yes. And now you're here. In my woods. Evelyn blinked. His woods. The words weren't said with arrogance, but with claim. Not in a colonial sense. Not like the way her father claimed acres and slaves. This man spoke like someone who belonged to the land as much as it belonged to him. I suppose I am, she said. They fell into silence again. He watched her without judgment. She was used to eyes that measured her worth in skin and dowry. His were different, cautious, curious, maybe even respectful. I'm Evelyn, she offered after a long moment. He nodded once. Tawodi, she repeated it carefully. Tawodi. It means hawk, he said. In my language, she gave him a tired smile. That explains the way you move. He glanced sideways at her. You watched me move? You watched me first, she replied. A faint flicker of amusement danced at the corner of his mouth, though it never quite formed a smile. The fire burned lower, casting soft shadows over the mossy ground. The air grew colder, and Evelyn pulled her mother's cloak tighter. Tawodi stood and removed a folded hide from his pack. Without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him in surprise. "You'll freeze with just that cloth," he said. "What about you?" "I don't freeze," he replied. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue Dad as he sat back down on the opposite side of the fire. Evelyn realized something strange. She didn't feel afraid. Not truly. Tawodi had the strength to harm her. He had the silence and weapons to overpower her. And yet, he hadn't even touched her hand. He had offered her food, fire, and protection, and nothing more. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt something that wasn't safety or fear or comfort. She felt respected Dad as the stars glittered above the canopy and the fire crackled low. Two strangers, Runaway and Exile, sat in a silence that no longer felt empty. And in the stillness of the forest, something quietly began. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the scent of smoke, the warmth of a dying fire, and the unmistakable sense of movement around her. She sat up quickly, heart-lurching, but Tawodi was already there kneeling beside Adeline, inspecting her hooves. His movements were precise, patient. "She's tired," he said without looking up. "Needs rest." "She's all I have," Evelyn murmured, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "No," he replied simply, "not anymore." Evelyn wasn't sure what he meant, but she didn't press. Something about the way he spoke, short, quiet, never wasting breath, was starting to make a strange kind of sense. The forest had its own rhythm, and so did he. They broke camp quickly. Tawodi led them east, deeper into the trees, away from the broken trail that Evelyn had followed the night before. The terrain grew harsher, steep inclines, thickets of bramble, fallen logs hidden in tall grass. Evelyn had to walk now, her skirts torn and muddied. Adeline followed behind, her head low. The silence between them was not unfriendly. It was focused, but around midday, Tawodi stopped. Evelyn nearly ran into him. "What is it?" He held up a hand. Then she heard it, faint but clear. A snapped twig. The whisper of dry leaves disturbed by footsteps. More than one set. "Ave?" "Come," he said quietly. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "My father's men?" Tawodi crouched low, eyes scanning the forest floor. 3 men, on horses, clothes. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "What do we do?" "We disappear," he said. Before she could question him, he was already moving, slipping through the trees like smoke. Evelyn followed, stumbling once, catching herself on a moss-covered branch. Her boots slid on the slope as they climbed into a dense cluster of pines. Tawodi reached back, steadying her with one strong hand before pulling her forward. They dropped behind a boulder, hidden beneath a curtain of vines. From here, they could see the trail below, and then hooves, voices. She couldn't have gone far. "I swear she came through here, Silas." Evelyn froze. That voice. It was him, Silas Danton. The cold certainty in his tone hadn't changed. Neither had the contempt. She shrank behind the boulder, her fingers digging into the damp earth. "They'll search the ridge," Tawodi whispered. "Then head west. I left tracks that way." "You misled them?" His eyes flicked to hers. "I'm a hunter," she swallowed hard, "and I'm prey." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The riders passed within 50 feet of them, Silas in front, 2 hired men behind him. Their eyes were sharp, their guns readied. Evelyn clenched, her jaw trying to quiet her breath. Silas hadn't changed. His face still looked like carved stone, sharp, cruel, entitled, but for the first time he wasn't in control. Not here, not in this place. After they passed, the woods fell silent. Again, Evelyn sagged against the rock. "They'll keep looking, for a while," Tawodi said. "But they'll give up. Your father's influence fades in these hills." "But Silas doesn't give up." Tawodi regarded her for a long moment. "He will, or he'll regret staying." She believed him. They waited a while longer, then resumed their journey, circling wide around the ridge. Evelyn's legs ached. Her stomach growled. And yet she felt steadier now. She wasn't alone. She wasn't being dragged toward a fate she didn't choose. She had met the enemy's eyes and remained hidden. Alive. By evening they reached a hidden glade nestled between two ridges. A stream cut through the trees, and a small lean-to of wood and bark stood beneath a towering oak. "My place," Tawodi said simply. Evelyn looked around in quiet awe. This wasn't just shelter, it was a home. Built with care, surrounded by traps, caches, and a small garden tucked beneath a slope. "You live here? By yourself?" "For 4 winters," he said. "After the others left." "The others?" He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt and lit a fire. Evelyn helped without being asked, gathering dry branches, shaking out their supplies, boiling water in a tin pot he unearthed from a hidden crate. By the time night fell, she sat wrapped in a blanket of silence and warmth, not just from the fire, but from the strange, quiet presence of the man across from her. "They won't find you here," Tawodi said at last. "I believe you," she replied, and for the first time since she had ridden away from the Monroe estate, Evelyn began to feel something strange. Safe. Not bought, not bartered, not protected like glass, safe like a woman who had begun to belong. The storm clouds that once followed Evelyn like a curse began to fade, replaced by crisp air, birdsong, and the smell of pine and firewood. Every morning, she rose with the sun to the sound of Tawodi splitting wood or checking his snares. And every evening, they shared quiet meals by the fire: venison, wild onions, trout pulled fresh from the stream. They didn't talk much, but what little they said carried weight. He spoke in few words, but his presence filled every silence like a stone dropped in water. Evelyn had never known a man like him. He never demanded, never ordered. When she offered to help, he nodded. When she asked questions about the woods or how to skin a fish, he showed her without comment. He let her fail and try again and fail again, and never once made her feel like less for it. There was something sacred about the way he gave her space. Like he understood what it meant to feel trapped, to be bound by others' expectations. One night, while the fire cracked and the sky above their clearing shimmered with stars, Evelyn asked the question that had been burning inside her since the first night they met. "Why did you help me?" Tawodi glanced up from where he was sharpening a blade. "You looked like someone who needed it." "There are plenty of people who need help," she replied. "Most get ignored." He paused. "I've been ignored too." She looked at him, then really looked. There was a kind of loneliness in his eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with being alone, the kind that came from being cut off, pushed out, labeled. "I heard stories about the Cherokee," she said cautiously. "About the removal, the Trail of Tears," he nodded. "My people were marched west. Some stayed behind, hid in the hills. Others blended in. Did you?" "I refused to join the soldiers who came to fight our kin," he said. "They called me a traitor. So I left. I built my own life here." Evelyn swallowed. "And you've been alone since?" "Mostly." She wanted to ask if he ever got lonely, but somehow she already knew the answer. He just bore it differently than she did. She had been surrounded by people her whole life, yet felt more invisible than she did now, sitting beside a man who spoke so little but saw her so clearly. A log popped in the fire. Tawodi stood and disappeared into the lean-to. When he returned, he held a rolled bundle wrapped in buckskin. "I was going to trade this," he said, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a worn but sturdy riding jacket, soft leather pants, and a flint knife. Evelyn's brow furrowed. For what? Salt, rope, flour. He paused, then added, but maybe you should have it. She stared at the clothes. They were far more practical than the torn, mud-soaked dress she wore. They smelled like cedar and smoke. She reached out, ran her hand over the fabric. Why give it to? Me? He met her eyes. Because you don't belong to them anymore. Her throat tightened. The statement was simple, but it struck her like thunder. He didn't say with me. He said, not them. He wasn't claiming her. He was freeing her. Still, she couldn't ignore the weight behind his gaze. The offer wasn't just about the clothes. It was more than that. Unspoken, but present in every word he didn't say. He was offering her a place, a chance to stay. A life not built from duty, but from choice. She held the bundle close. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered. You'll learn. I'm not strong like you. You're here, aren't you? She blinked against the heat rising in her eyes. He stepped back, giving her space. You don't owe me anything, he said. Not your thanks, not your loyalty. You can stay. Or you can leave when you're ready. And then he walked to the far side of the fire and lay down with his back to her. No pressure, no questions, no reach for her hand. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep much. She lay curled beneath the blanket, staring at the stars above the trees. The buckskin bundle held to her chest like armor. She had been born to a house full of riches, but this was the first time someone had given her something without a price, and deep down she began to wonder what would it feel like. To stop running? The wind began to change by late October. Nights grew longer, sharper, and more silent. Birds flew south in hurried formations, and the streams grew colder with each passing day. Evelyn had never known the forest like this, not as a place that breathed and shifted with the seasons, but as a living, pulsing being that held secrets in its roots. Tawodi noticed the changes first. Storms coming, he said one morning as he watched the sky. Could be snow by next week. Evelyn glanced up at the trees. The leaves were turning gold and red like flames. I've never spent a winter in the mountains. He looked at her carefully. Then you'll stay. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an order either. It was a quiet acknowledgement of something they both knew. She wasn't ready to go back, and there wasn't really anything to return to. Even if her father hadn't disowned her, even if Silas had abandoned the search, the woman who had once sat in those drawing rooms was gone. That night, Evelyn wore the buckskin pants for the first time. She expected to feel awkward. Instead, she felt free, light, as if something heavy had been peeled away from her, piece by piece. The clothes didn't make her someone else. They revealed the person she was always meant to be. She helped Tawodi winterize the cabin. They stocked dried fish and meat, collected herbs, hung hides, stuffed cracks with moss. She learned quickly. She asked questions when she had to, and observed when she didn't. Every bruise on her fingers and blister on her heel felt earned, and every time she turned to find him already watching her, quiet, steady, never invading, it shook something loose inside her chest. One evening, while snow flurried just outside the lean-to, Evelyn sat at the fire stringing dried berries while Tawodi sharpened the stone-bladed axe. The air was warm, the kind of quiet that felt peaceful, not empty. Why didn't you ask me to stay? She asked suddenly. He didn't look up. You already did. That wasn't the same, she said. You gave me clothes, food, shelter. You've protected me from your own people's judgment and my past, but you've never once asked for anything. Not even a reason why I ran. You'd tell me when you were ready. I think I'm ready now. He paused, slowly set the axe aside. The fire danced between them, casting orange light on the curve of his jaw, the thoughtful narrowing of his eyes. Evelyn inhaled. I was promised to Silas Danton because he owns the land adjacent to my father's. He's rich, respected, and terrifying behind closed doors. My father wanted power. I was the price, so I left. Not because I had a plan. Not because I'm brave. I just couldn't marry a man I feared. Tawodi nodded once without interruption or pity. You chose yourself. I didn't even know I was allowed to. Silence again, but it wasn't awkward. It was whole, solid. You ever regret it? He asked. She considered the question. No, I regret not running sooner. Tawodi reached into a small wooden box beside the hearth and pulled out a length of twine and bone. He worked quietly, his fingers wrapping and tying until he'd created a small charm, a feathered pendant. He held it out to her. For courage, he said simply. The kind that moves quiet but lasts longer. Evelyn took it slowly, reverently. It wasn't an ornament. It wasn't a gift to impress. It was something made with hands and heart. She fastened it around her neck. Their eyes met again across the fire. And this time, the silence felt different, warmer. Like the edge of something they hadn't spoken yet, but both felt deep in their bones. That night, snow began to fall in earnest, soft and silent and heavy. They sat close beside the flames, not touching, but near enough that Evelyn could feel the warmth of his presence against her skin. She didn't ask him to move closer, and he didn't need to, because something had already shifted between them. Not claimed, not confessed, but chosen slowly, like snow building on a roof until it becomes something solid, something sure. And for the first time since leaving everything behind, Evelyn didn't wonder if she belonged somewhere. She knew she did. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It fell in thick, gentle silence, blanketing the forest in white. Trees bent beneath the weight. Animal tracks vanished within minutes. And the world shrank to the small glade where Evelyn and Tawodi lived, side by side, caught in a quiet pause between past and future. Inside the cabin, the fire never died. Evelyn learned how to feed it through the night, how to bank it to keep the warmth steady. She learned the language of smoke and sparks and, slowly, the language of the man across from her. Their routine became something like a rhythm. She woke before sunrise to stir the pot of beans and roots. He would check the snares, return with rabbits or pheasant, and quietly clean them while she prepared the herbs. They worked without speaking sometimes, but the silence was no longer strange. It was the kind of comfort only earned through trust. Still, something had changed. Evelyn felt it every time Tawodi handed her a bowl of stew or brushed snow off her cloak before she stepped outside. A tension not dangerous, but deeply human had crept into the quiet, something unspoken. Something close. It came to a head one evening just after dusk, when Tawodi returned from the woods with a bundle of cedar and a small pouch of wild berries. He looked at her as he crossed the threshold, his eyes steady, but there was something new in them. A question. After supper, he stood beside the fire and reached for something behind the stack of hides near the wall. A small folded bundle wrapped in deerskin. When he turned and handed it to her, Evelyn hesitated. What is this? Open it. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, her hand shaking a little, whether from nerves or cold, she didn't know. Inside was a dress, not one like her old satin gowns, but something simpler, hand-sewn from soft brown fabric, stitched with beadwork at the cuffs and collar. A belt woven from dyed thread and featherwork lay across the top. It's beautiful, she whispered. He didn't smile, but his voice was soft. It was my mother's. Evelyn looked up at him in surprise. You're giving this to me? He nodded once. But why? He was quiet for a long time before he finally said, Because I want you to stay. Not just through the snow. Not just until it's safe. Her heart thudded. I want you to stay because you choose to, as my partner, as my wife. Her breath caught. Your wife? Tawodi stepped closer, but not too close. His voice was steady, calm, respectful. In my people's way, a union is made by choice, by vow, and by shared life. No priest, no paper, just two souls who agree. No one is owned. No one is bought. Evelyn looked down at the dress, her fingers trembling against the smooth fabric. She had once been a girl sold to a man she feared. Now she stood before a man offering her everything: his name, his home, his future, without taking anything from her. And yet she was afraid. I don't know if I can be someone's wife, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not after what I ran from. Not after the way marriage was used to break me. I won't break you, he said gently. I know. That's what scares me. You're not like them. And I don't want to bring all of them with me when I say yes. Tawodi nodded. Then don't answer now. He turned to tend the fire, as if the conversation was done. As if he had said what needed saying and would never pressure her for more. But Evelyn didn't walk away. She stood there for a long moment, clutching the dress to her chest, heart pounding like a drum. And then, without speaking, she stepped behind the wooden divider, slipped out of her worn clothes, and pulled the soft garment over her head. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. When she stepped out again, Tawodi turned. His eyes locked with hers, and though neither of them said a word, she saw the truth in his face and in her own. Reflection in his gaze. She was no longer running. She was arriving. The thaw came slowly. Snow softened into slush. Ice cracked in. The trees and rivers groaned back to life beneath the warming sun. Birds returned, first cautious and shrill. Then the deer, lean from winter, began to move through the glade again. Spring meant survival. But it also meant the world would no longer remain hidden. Evelyn had begun to hope that Silas had given up, that her father's anger had cooled, that perhaps the people who once owned her name and dictated her future had simply moved on. But the past doesn't forget that easily. It arrived one morning in the form of hoofbeats. Tawodi heard them first. He was chopping wood near the tree line when he froze, axe still in midair. Riders, he said grimly. Evelyn stepped onto the porch. The woven belt of her new dress cinched at the waist, hair braided down her back. Her fingers went numb as she followed his gaze. 3 men rode into the clearing, 2 deputies in dark coats flanking a familiar figure. Silas Danton. He dismounted slowly. With that same hollow confidence she remembered his eyes sweeping the cabin, the firewood, the porch. And finally, her, Miss Monroe, he said with mock civility. You've had us worried? Evelyn didn't answer. One of the deputies stepped forward, unfolding a document. By order of Judge Monroe, we are here to retrieve Miss Evelyn Monroe, lawful bride of Mr. Silas Danton. Tawodi moved, then stepping forward, placing himself between Evelyn and the men. She's not his. She is by law, Silas replied, his voice as cold as river ice. The contract was signed. I gave your father enough land to make you a queen. I never agreed to that contract, Evelyn said firmly, stepping up beside Tawodi. And I certainly never took vows. You fled before the ceremony, Silas sneered, but your silence didn't cancel your obligations. You belong to me. Tawodi's voice was quiet but unyielding. She belongs to no one. The deputies hesitated. Silas pressed on. You've harbored a fugitive, Cherokee. That alone could hang you. Evelyn stepped in front of Tawodi now, her chin high. Then hang me too, because I chose to come here. I stayed here, and I'm not going back. Silas's expression curdled. You think this savage can protect you forever? He already has, she snapped. The deputies exchanged uncertain glances. They'd been sent to retrieve a trembling girl, not a defiant woman standing beside a hunter like stone and fire. The law was thin out here, and public opinion mattered more than ink and stamps. Silas moved forward, anger burning in his eyes. "You ungrateful little—" Tawodi reached for his bow, and the deputies raised their hands instantly. "That's—" "Far enough, Danton," one warned. "She's speaking for herself." Silas turned on the man. "She's hysterical. She's been brainwashed." Evelyn looked directly at the deputies now. Her voice was calm but unwavering. "My name is Evelyn Monroe. I was forced into a contract I never consented to. I ran because I feared for my safety. I've lived here freely, under no threat, and I asked to be left in peace." The second deputy shifted uncomfortably. "You're of age?" "I'm 23. "Then—" "The law can't force you to marry anyone," the man muttered. He looked to his partner. "We should go." Silas stared at them, stunned. "You're just going to walk away? She's not a runaway." "Not anymore. You've got no legal hold over her." Silas turned back to Evelyn. His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, all of it." "No," she said. "I'll only regret the years I stayed silent." And then she did something bold, something final. She reached out and took Tawodi's hand, lacing her fingers with his in plain view. Silas saw it. The deputies saw it. The forest saw it. The past had come to collect her, and she'd sent it away. After the riders disappeared down the trail, Silas fuming and defeated, the lawmen too wary to look back, Evelyn stood in silence for a long time. Her hand was still in Tawodi's, though neither of them had moved. Her breath came slow, steady, and though her heart still thudded in her chest, it wasn't from fear. It was from something deeper, like the weight of her old life had finally slid off her shoulders and crumbled to dust. "I thought it would feel different," she murmured. "What would?" Tawodi asked softly, letting go of all of it. "The fear. The name, the girl I used to be." He looked at her. "You didn't let go." "You fought," she smiled faintly. "With your help." He released her hand gently. "With your choice." And that was the truth of it. She hadn't been rescued. Not like the stories she'd read growing up. She had chosen her freedom, and she had earned it. That evening, Tawodi prepared the fire carefully, clearing a wide space in the clearing, laying cedar boughs and river stones in a circle. He didn't say what it was for, but Evelyn knew. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, reverent. "My people don't believe in ownership. Not of land, not of women. But we believe in union when two lives walk forward as one, not behind, not ahead, side by side." She felt her throat tighten. "And you want that?" "With me? I already have it," he said. "I only want to—" "Name it now." Tears stung the corners of her eyes. Not out of sorrow but peace. They didn't have guests. There were no ribbons or rings. But as the moon rose above the trees, Tawodi stood before her in his finest buckskin, his hair tied back with leather cord, a hawk feather tucked behind his ear. Evelyn wore the dress he had given her, his mother's, with the woven belt and the beadwork she'd added herself over the long winter nights. A simple fire burned between them, not as a barrier, but as a witness. Tawodi spoke first. "I have no gold, no promise of comfort. Only these woods, this home. And my word, if you accept that, I'll be your shield, your kin, your fire through the cold." Evelyn's lips trembled, but she met his gaze without blinking. "I don't want gold. I've lived in a house of it, and it nearly cost me everything. I want this. You, this land, this life. I'll be your equal, your voice when words fail, and your peace when the world turns cruel." He reached out and placed a carved wooden pendant in her hand shaped like a hawk's wing. It was worn smooth by time and touch. "My mother's," he said. Evelyn clutched it close. "I'll keep. It's safe." Then, without instruction, without fear, they stepped around the fire 3 times together, once for the past, Once for the present, once for what lay ahead. No paper. No preacher. Just fire, earth, and truth. When the final step was done, Tawodi gently pulled her into his arms. His forehead touched hers. "You're home now," he whispered. And Evelyn knew she was. Later that night, as the fire dwindled and the forest quieted, they lay beneath the stars, wrapped in fur and warmth. Not just physical warmth, but the kind that came from shared trust and chosen connection. Tawodi brushed her hair back from her face. "You don't regret it?" "No," she said softly. "Only that I didn't get here sooner." He smiled then, a rare, true smile that lit up the quiet places of his face, and she knew in that moment, this wasn't just survival. This was the life she had never been told she could have, a life she had found not by escaping into the arms of a man, but by walking boldly beside one. Spring unfolded like a story. Evelyn had never thought she'd live to see the earth turned green again. Buds swelled on branches, flowers curled open like soft secrets, and the forest awakened with the quiet rhythm of life renewed. The days grew long, the nights warm. It was a time of growing, not just for the land, but for Evelyn herself. She had become someone new, not overnight and not with ceremony, but slowly, with every trap she set, every wound she cleaned, every word of Cherokee she learned by listening to Tawodi speak to the wind and the fire. She was not simply living in the wilderness now. She was part of it. The girl who once curtsied under chandeliers and feared her own shadow was gone. In her place stood a woman who could track a deer, stitch a wound, hold her ground. One afternoon, while gathering wild ginger near the creek, Evelyn heard footsteps behind her, soft, deliberate. She turned with a smile even before he spoke. "You walk quieter than I do now," Tawodi said, amused. "I've been watching you," she teased. He stepped close and handed her a folded piece of paper. "Someone came through the valley." Sighed. They passed through town and saw this posted at the trading post. She unfolded it. Her name was at the top in bold ink. Wanted, Evelyn Monroe, runaway daughter of Judge Monroe. Subject no longer under family protection. No bounty. Considered legally estranged. Evelyn stared at the words for a long moment. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her heart didn't pound. "So," she said at last, "I've been erased." "Or released," Tawodi said. She met his eyes, something calm and final settling in her chest. "Then I guess Evelyn Monroe is dead." He tilted his head. "And who stands before me now?" She took a breath, glancing at the water, the trees, the sky, and then back at him. "I don't know what name I'll take, but it'll be mine." "Not?" "My father's, not his. Mine," he nodded once. "Good." They didn't need to say more. The paper crumbled in the breeze behind them, and she didn't look back. Later that week, Tawodi brought her to a high ridge that overlooked the valley where the river cut like a silver thread through the trees. Below them, the land stretched, wide and wild, untouched, free. "I used to come here as a boy," he said, "to remember who I was. And now?" She asked. "Now I come to remember us." She stood beside him, the wind playing in her hair. "Do your people name places?" "Yes," he said, "but only the ones worth remembering." Evelyn smiled. "Then this one needs a name." He looked at her. "So do you?" She turned toward him slowly, sunlight washing across her face. "Then give me one." He thought for a moment. "You walked through fire, left behind chains, spoke truth in front of men who would have silenced you. And you brought spring with you." His voice was low, reverent. "Your name is Amma Yusti," he said. "Little water, because you changed everything quietly." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not from grief. They were from recognition. She nodded, then let it be so. In the years that followed, Travelers who passed through the hills spoke of a quiet couple who lived above the valley, a Cherokee hunter and a woman with fire in her eyes and a hawk, feather braided in her hair. Some said she'd once been a judge's daughter. Others claimed she'd been stolen by a native. The truth was softer than legend, but far more powerful. She hadn't been stolen. She hadn't been saved. She had been seen. And in a world that once tried to own her, that was the greatest freedom of all. Evelyn Monroe was gone. Amma Yusti remained, and she belonged to no one but the land, the fire, and the man who had never tried to tame her only to walk beside her.